So, hi, I am Niels and I'm with the project Making the Hidden Visible, co-designing for public values in standard making and governance. We're with Stefania Milan, Paul Grove, and Adamantia Rajovica, Maxigas, Jeroen de Voice, Effie Uli, and me, Niels ten Hoover. And we are from the University of Amsterdam, from the Media Studies and Data Science Department, from the Law Department at the University of Groningen. And we're working together with the Dutch Standard Institute, NEN, and of course, we're funded here through NGO. And why are we studying standard setting? Well, it's actually rather simple because infrastructure sets the invisible rules that govern the spaces of our everyday life, and changes, according to Keller Easterling, to the globalizing world are being written not in the language of law and diplomacy, but rather in the language of infrastructure. And standards are the grammar to the language of infrastructure. So infrastructure and standards especially are hugely important in shaping everyday life, but not much is known in the public debate about how standards are developed. This project brings public values in the specialized realm of standardization by investigating standards making a relation to public values. So, how can and do values influence standards making? And looking simultaneously at technology and people, including designers, producers, users, and consumers, and by analyzing technology development and implementation in the context of the respective governance arrangements and legal aspects. To help us inform how we can better understand and investigate the relationship between societal values and standards, how we can better understand the relationship between inclusion of values such as openness, transparency, and inclusion of all concerned parties, and their impact on standards and the standards market, and to what extent new approaches, methodologies, and technologies can help wire in or facilitate public values in standard making. And we're doing that through processes of co-design to see if we can help create standards that are value and rights respecting by design, and develop a corresponding methodology and intelligent interventions able to involve public and private actors, and a methodology for assessment of standards of technology and governance based on the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, and implemented following inter alia the Internet Engineering Task Force. So we've been underway for a bit now, and there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. First of all, good, because many of us have been locked up in their houses. We have many publications. So academics do academics. So we got a working paper, we got two accepted articles, five conference papers, and a book chapter. So that's going well. We have had several online events and workshops with standards and governance institutions, such as NEN, but also a workshop with the Internet Engineering Task Force and the Internet Architecture Board that actually happened 2 weeks ago, and a contribution to the Internet Governance Forum. So, in that sense, it really allowed us to participate. And also, these workshops had some outputs, such as a contribution to the data dashboard of the Internet Engineering Task Force on gender and geographical diversity. Furthermore, we're now collaborating with several universities, such as the University of Glasgow, New York State University, and UC Berkeley, on open source software for the quantitative analysis of standard setting, and thereby enabling standard setting analysis on an unprecedented scale, doing discourse, network, and statistical analysis for standards bodies that make the information about their standards and the settings process available. So we also have been engaging with government. So we co-wrote a report on the geopolitics of standards, and this has been now submitted to the Telecoms Authority of the Ministry of Economic Affairs in collaboration with Stratix. We have presented also part of that in a panel at the ECP annual conference in The Hague. We've been building experimental 5G networks as part of our code ethnography, because we haven't been able to do other ethnography. I'll go into that underneath the bad and the ugly, but we'll now stay with the good. So the 5G networks are working, and it has allowed to interrogate technology in different ways. So we've published a report with the Ford Foundation, Human Rights Are Not a Bug, about human rights in internet governance. And then we had small expansion projects, such as the People's 5G Lab, through support from the Global Digital Cultures Initiative. And we're going to organize an exhibition and workshops with the Amsterdam municipality to bring the knowledge back from the ivory tower, and also include and produce better perspectives. And part of that will also be an art exhibition, so really quite exciting stuff. And then we had quite some media exposure. We've been covered by the Internet Society and the NRC nationally, and internationally by the New York Times, the Face, and Vice. And we have another workshop on methods on researching standard setting coming up in January. So that is going well. And now I was going to show you some beautiful graphs and slides that we've been able to research standard setting process predominantly in the 3GPP and IETF. So we've been researching telecom standards such as 5G and internet standards such as TCP, HTTP, and the bodies that produce them. And so recently there has been a lot of talk about China taking over and versus the US. Sanctions came up and Europe was going to develop an alternative. At least that was a lot of the public discourse. But because we've analyzed the discourse, the stakeholders, and their effectiveness in these bodies, we actually see that there is not so much geographical tension whatsoever, and it's much more cross-sectoral competition. So it's much more the telecoms in China and the US working together to pressure Google as a content provider to get more content over data streams. So that's really interesting that we see that there is a discursive versus an infrastructural contestation. And the discursive contestation, which might be more due to socio-technical imaginaries that are produced, are more there to legitimize certain regimes orderings and do not really describe the reconfiguration of technological materiality that's going on. And to describe that process, we're now coining and developing the concept of network ideologies to expand the concept of socio-technical imaginaries. But this stuff has not been easy because, and there we come to the bad, we first of all have not been able to do ethnographic research, which we really do normally next to the quantitative research, because as you all know, more quantitative data needs more qualitative work to see if it works, how it works, what it means, etc. But we've not been able to participate in these meetings because they all went online. And because they all went online, it's much harder to pick up, do interviews, do observations. So but luckily that guided us to build more stuff, and that's also cool, and that's probably also going to result in the artwork. So yeah. So we've also not been able to organize co-design workshops thus far, even though that was an important part of our method and a method we wanted to develop. So we're still postponing that a bit and thinking about what to do with that, but we'll come back to our question at the end about that. And what we found is that data by standards bodies is notoriously messy, even more than expected. And it's even more messy than expected for our machine learning models. So that is also very interesting to see that even Facebook algorithms can't make any sense of the data of standards bodies. So it's very hard to extract entities through entity resolution. And it's hard to compare data between bodies because of different methods of data gathering and data production and representation of these bodies. So there is a lot of hand coding of data needed. But then again, that hand coding is actually providing a lot of insight in the data, and then also providing us an access to talk with people from these bodies on how the data is produced. So their ethnography kind of seeps back in through the organizational. So that is definitely nice. So the ugly, it's not clear how long the COVID measures will last and when organizing and participating in national and international meetings is possible again. But so that is especially ugly if we look vis-a-vis the initial plan, but maybe actually not that ugly because the offline workshop we organized went online at last moment. And even the hackathon part, which was 2 days, worked really well. Like over 90% of the people participated, and we produced a lot of code and graphs and did stuff also among people that never worked before. So there were people on the US West Coast, there were people in India, and so we chose for a rather short time slot, so between 3 and 7 Central European time. But during that time, people really worked together, and that was really rewarding. That went better than expected, actually. And more time for theory development and writing. And what we see, and that's interesting, in standard studies, there are a lot of economists, um, there are a lot of legal scholars, and there's not yet that many people that combine the analysis of technological materiality with these other sciences. So there's a lot of interdisciplinary work still possible, and so we have a lot of time to think, write, and learn about that. One hard thing there is that we what something we really struggle with is, and that's a theme that I'd love to discuss. So can the citizen be involved in standard setting? Because what we develop more and more expertise and understanding and find out that these are really specialized bodies with really distinct and clear interests. So if we want to democratize or build in public values, who could or should represent these public values, and how can or should public values be represented there? So, because increasingly we're trying to understand, and that's also what the literature shows, we cannot ask for voluntary participation through the whole process. So, at what moment could you interact? How should that be done? Should that be done through interviews? How do you sample people? And how do you make sure that there's a meaningful participation? So, that is stuff that we are struggling with, and that I'm very excited to learn from. And else we can also talk about all the other fun stuff we've been working on.